I'm going to go ahead and start recording. Welcome to those of you who are here. And I just feel the need to comment that we had a really big turnout when we were talking about the logistics of getting into college. And so far, I know it's probably hard timing with holidays and finals coming up, but we have fewer present. So I hope that that's not because mental health is like a topic that people are concerned about entering into, acknowledging. But on the college readiness committee, we have the belief that if you are not well, then you're not ready for college. So with that in mind, we have asked Menninger Clinic to join us to give us some information about what to watch for, how to support our kids, how to support our kids in supporting their friends. And I will share that we have Angela. How do you pronounce your last name, Angela?
Korath.
Korath. Okay. Hold on. I can get back to my page. That was okay. And she is program director for Menninger's partial hospital and intensive outpatient programs, IOPs. She also sees clients at the Bel Air location of the Menninger outpatient services. She works with children, teens, parents, couples. Her specialties include premarital and marital counseling, parenting and family counseling, dialectical behavioral therapy, which I believe should be taught in the school, or it should be in the water, and severe shyness and codependency. So welcome, Angela.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. We also have Kate. And Kate, I've known you for a few months now, and I don't know that I know how to correctly pronounce your last name.
That's quite all right. Likes.
Oh, okay. Just sort of like it looks. She is director of community collaborations for adolescents and families for Menninger. Her role is to bring Menninger's expertise to the community through program development and education. Kate also sees adolescents and their families and specializes as well in dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT. So welcome, Kate. And I'm just gonna mute myself and turn it over. And if anyone has any questions in the chat, I'll be there. And we are recording so that anyone who wants to gain some knowledge and come to this information with a beginner's mind will be able to do that. Okay, I'm muting now.
Can you guys tell me if you guys can see my screen, my PowerPoint? Okay, perfect. So thank you. Thank you for hosting us and allowing us to really come and share some insights and awareness and be a resource to parents. We know what it's like. We work with a lot of adolescents that are struggling and their families. So we think this is an important topic, and we appreciate you all giving us the environment to do that. So some of our learning objectives for today is to kind of understand the scope of the problem with suicide in adolescents, the myths and misconceptions, risk and warning signs, as well as how to help someone that is struggling. So I think it's really important to understand some of the definitions and the data that's out there, why this is such an important topic for us to talk about, especially while our kids are in our homes and as they venture away and are on their own when they go off to college. So when we define suicide, it is when people harm themselves with the goal of ending their life and they die as a result. It is referred to death by suicide, died by suicide, or suicide. We have moved away from saying things like completed or committed suicide because of the negative connotations and the criminal overtones to it. Suicide attempt is when people harm themselves with the goal of ending their life, but they do not die. Passive or indirect suicide is when people engage in behaviors that may negatively impact or damage their health. For example, reckless driving, not eating or refusing to eat, and not taking their prescribed medications. So what is some of the data for our age group? Between the ages of 10 to 24, this is the second leading cause of death in the United States. For 10 to 14-year-olds, for 15 to 24-year-olds, it's the third. So as you can tell from this graph, it affects kiddos as young as 5 years old and older. So it's an important topic to talk about. It is among the top 10 leading causes of death in the United States for all ages, but among young people, it is on the higher end. And that was there before the pandemic, was there during the pandemic, and still is there. The newest data does show us that there is a slight dip, but not enough that we shouldn't talk about it. So what are the suicide rates by gender is really indicated, males versus females. These are those that completed. You can see that more males complete the suicides, but both males and females are in here. This was the newest data the CDC put out between males and females. About 50,000 individuals lost their lives to suicide in 2022. About 40,000 males and 10,000 females. So the percentage of high school students that are affected, there is a primarily heightened risk for females versus males. Females think about suicide and attempt more than males, but males actually, from the previous slide, show that they actually complete them. But both are affected by it and thinking about it. What are some common methods that are used? Firearms are the most common method that people end their lives with, but they also use suffocation and poisoning. So one of the things that I share with families, I don't like to get into politics or religion or hobbies. We live in the state of Texas. There's a lot of people that go hunting and fishing and things like that. But I tell parents, I don't want you to not do any of those things, but if you have a child or someone in your home that is suffering with suicidal ideation, let's limit to their access. Let's take it out of the homes. Let's lock them up. Let's put finger passwords on there. Let's reduce that barrier or increase that barrier for them not to be able to have access. Some other important facts. Adolescents between the ages of 10 to 14 actually account for 14% of all suicides. It is the second highest cause of death. The groups most at risk are non-Hispanic, American Indians and Alaskan Natives, and sexual minorities. The LGBTQ plus communities and identifying students have suicide rates that are 4 times their heterosexual counterparts. Among the estimated about 200,000 emergency department visits, collected data that showed girls and women between the ages of 20 and 24 were particularly had high risk during the pandemic. Now that we're going to move away a little bit from the data and the numbers, I just want us to remember one thing. Behind all numbers and data are real people who are suffering, their family members who love them, and our countless individuals who care for them. So I want you all to keep that in mind and keep that in the forefront. So what are some of the myths and misconceptions? You can't stop a person from attempting suicide once their mind is made up. Actually, the fact is, people often experience ambivalence about dying. Someone who is suicidal not necessarily want to die, they want their emotional pain to end. Only depressed people kill themselves and other people are not at risk. Suicidal thoughts can happen to actually anyone, all ages, all people, all races, all ethnic backgrounds, people without mental illness or with mental illness. People who encounter psychosocial stressors experience increased need, increased hopelessness and helplessness, as well as suicidal ideations. Every death is preventable. There was no way of preventing every single suicide, but there is a lot that can be done to look for signs to prevent it. People who threaten suicide are just seeking attention. I will say among teens and young adults, this is the #1 thing that they worry about from people and say this is what their parents share. All suicide attempts should be treated as though the person has an intent to die. It is to be taken seriously. Most young people think about suicide, never seek or ask for help about their problems, with their problems. There's a lot of evidence that shows that they often tell their peers of their thoughts and plans. Adolescents are more likely to ask for help through nonverbal gestures than to express their situations verbally to others. So again, text messaging, writing, journaling, through artwork. There's a lot of myths. Talking about suicide or asking someone if they feel suicide will encourage suicide attempts. Actually, the opposite is true. Bringing up the topic of suicide and asking them directly is very helpful. Most often they welcome the question because they are too afraid and ashamed to bring the topic up themselves. If my child self-harms, they are also suicidal. Many people who struggle with non-suicidal self-injury and NSSI may also struggle with suicide. However, these are two different phenomena and are distinct from each other. Suicide is inherently selfish. Suicide ideation is often our brains looking for solutions to some form of extreme pain, typically emotional or physical. They need to stop thinking about suicide. We can't control our thoughts. Many people will grapple with suicide ideation for their whole life. However, the intent will go down with help. So let's talk about some risk factors, warning signs, and protective factors. Risk factors include stressful events or situations that may increase the likelihood of a suicide attempt or death, but it's not predictive. Protective factors are personal and social resources that promote resiliency and reduces the potential of suicide and other high-risk behaviors. Warning signs. The early observable signs that indicate increased risk of suicide for someone in the near term, typically within hours or days. So just as
I just want to jump in for 1 sec and
Sure.
just highlight a few things that you said that I think are worth highlighting. So one is that teens are most often going to tell a friend or a peer or someone. And so part of why this conversation is important is not only for your children, but as I sort of mentioned at the beginning, if your kiddo has heard from their friend that the friend is suicidal or is really struggling, what are they supposed to do with it? I mean, that's an enormous thing to carry for any of us, but especially for an adolescent. So part of what we're hoping to do here is to learn what we can do so that we can talk to our kids about those scenarios as well. And so definitely go back and check out the myths and the and the facts, because I know we didn't have a lot of time to spend on each of them, but knowing that you are not going to cause a suicide by just directly asking a person, what's going on with them. And it in fact can offer some, compassion. They may feel cared for through that question. So anyway, just.
Yes. And I'll touch on the fact that piece about kids telling kids and what do parents should do or teach their kids to do. I think it's really, really important because that is how a lot of the kiddos end up here. It is because they told a peer and the peer is struggling, or the peer is, waiting up all night with them and, don't want to, keep that, want to be loyal, but don't want to betray them.
Right,
Also
right.
impacted.
That's a tough position to be in. So I think,
Yeah.
if this isn't like, oh, my kiddo doesn't have any of these signs, great. That doesn't mean that this doesn't affect, a niece or nephew or a student or a friend. So,
Right. Yes. Some risk factors to kind of think about. Just risk factors for heart disease are different from warning signs of a heart attack. Risk factors for suicide, it's helpful to determine how imminent the risk might be. Most people with like panic or agitation or insomnia won't kill themselves. But if there are activating states, for example, a star male athlete with prior attempts with firearms in the home are at more imminent risk. So it's really important to know some of the risk factors, which include prior suicide attempts, any psychiatric conditions, a history of substance use or dependence, chronic suicidal ideation, a chronic medical condition, or struggling with pain, limited or no sense of belonging or connecting, feeling burdensome. A lot of times kiddos feel that they're a burden to their families or their communities. They have limited coping skills, unstable or turbulent sense of psychosocial stressors. They could be going through a transition in their homes or their families. They could be moving schools. Their parents are not together anymore. Their peer groups are different, or they've transitioned from high school to college and don't know where their peers are now. Limited ability to identify reasons for living. They don't feel like there's a reason. They're impulsive, or there's aggression. Maturity plays their age, their gender, and their race.
and at Carnegie, we have 100%. I know the parents know this, but Angela and Kate, I don't know if we are the only 100% GT high school in HISD. So these kids are taking, 6 APs in some years. They're all seem to be real driven, bright people, and there's an intensity that can come with all that, those big brains. So
Yeah. The drive for perfection, the drive to achieve, right?
Mhm.
High achievers are some of the folks that we really do worry about because they can't tolerate not achieving. And so again, why is this so important to talk about? Our teens' brains aren't fully developed, right? Brains
Right.
don't fully develop till they're 27. So they don't have their wise minds or rational brains operating all the time. They could be highly intelligent, but emotionally not be able to have all of those things that they need. They're not firing properly, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that about the brain development, because I think it can be confusing for people when you have a kid who's super bright and
Right.
super self motivated,
Yeah.
that they are
Perfect.
so mature in some ways, but they're still a kid inside. And in the context of the college admissions and the college readiness, it's a lot of pressure. So
So there are 3 other things that I want to mention, at least for adolescents or young adults, that also are contributing factors for suicide to be mindful of or aware of. Depression, 20% of teenagers report incidences of depressions. This includes feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness, loneliness, helplessness. Often teens feel like suicide is the only way to end some of these feelings, is through suicide or death. Sleep problems is huge at the Menninger Clinic. One of the things that we actually take outcomes for all our patients, inpatient and in our intensive programs, is to look at sleep patterns, sleep behaviors. Being awake at night heightens risk of suicide thoughts and attempts, which is a part of the consequence of a lack of help and resources. Recently, in the last year, we've had the national text digits come out so that people can access resources even at night. So that's part of the reason that what came out, and that is when a heightened, and I have a story here. I have a client that a family reached out to us partly because this high achieving kiddo had a very distressful day. Her peers were upset with her about something. She was busy achieving, horse riding, doing what she needed to do. And then the end of the day, the parents thought she was tucked away in her bed. But the next thing they knew, they got a knock on the door by the sheriff's department. That kiddo had reached out to a suicide hotline, and when they were assessing her, thought she was high acuity and went to go get help. The parents were shocked. They had no clue. But the kid had shared she heard a lecture, or there was some poster at school that had a sign, and she looked up that she was feeling this way and wanted to get help, but could not share with her family that she was feeling this way. And the family said, we are very connected. We have dinners together. We do all kinds of things, but they had no clue that their child was struggling like that. But I think it's really important to say we could feel very connected and know our kids are tucked away in our beds and they still have some struggles that they are afraid to share with us, not because we're not approachable or wanting to help them. That's just hard for teenagers to do. Research also found that prolonged failure to achieve good night's sleep makes it really harder for people with depression, increased negative thinking and attention. So it's really important that your teens are getting amounts of sleep. High achieving students say, I need less sleep, I need to study, I need to study. So I think it's really important to find pockets for them to talk about that. Bullying. With the rise of social media and technology, bullying has become more prevalent than ever. Teens who experience bullying often see no way out of the situation other than suicide. I would say bullying is another top predictor or problem that teens are facing. You know, when I was growing up, I would say bullying was there. I went to school for 8 or 10 hours because I played sports, but I got to come home and got to go be with my family and get away from people, right? Kids these days don't get that. Social media is all around, technology is all around, it's 24/7. And again, whatever happens between a group gets shared and retweeted and reshared. So it lives in the ether forever. So kids feel like this is going to follow them forever. Their brains, remember, aren't fully functioning and they can't see the other side of this. And so not to negate, they shouldn't be bullied, that this shouldn't be happening, but this happens across all kinds of campuses.
I actually heard a stat a few weeks ago that hopefully I'm quoting accurately, but that 15% of kids intervene when there's like an instance of relational aggression or bullying. And 80% of the time they're successful in diffusing the situation. And so there's really something to that notion of being an upstander versus a bystander. And I mean, 15% can affect 80% change. So
yeah. And we always say it just takes one, right? It really just takes one agent in a family to get better, in a community to try to make a difference. So it really does. And it really actually helps the person that is being bullied to know that they're not alone, that somebody can stand beside them.
Yes.
So what are some warning signs? Remember, warning signs are observable signs that indicate risk. If you know a loved one that has been talking about suicidal ideation, struggling with substance, the word abuse is no longer used, it's actually use. If there's a high need or risk with use, feelings of purposelessness, increased anxiety, worrisome, feeling trapped, feeling like that this is never going to get better, this is how it's always going to be, there's no way out, hopelessness, feeling withdrawals from things that are important to them. If they liked sports, if they liked school, not engaging in those things that were of character to them. anger, agitations, out of the norm, mood changes that are atypical of your kiddo, recklessness. What I think is really important are protective factors. How can we do what we can to prevent our kiddos if they're struggling with these things, and or other kids? Making sure they have strong connections to their families or their peer groups or their support systems. If there's a fear of pain and dying. Cultural and religious beliefs that discourage suicide, but in a way that supports self-preservation. Support through ongoing medical and mental health care relationships, having providers that know your children, if that's a pediatrician, if that's a therapist, skills in problem solving, conflict resolution, and ways to handle non-violent handling of disputes. A lot of times kiddos struggle with how to resolve things as they're going through it. If it's a failing grade, if it's a friend not liking them not making a club or making a team. They just don't know how to wrap their brains around those things. Easy access to effective clinical care and support for help seeking. Limited access, again, to lethal high means to suicide. Remember, adolescent brains are fully developed. They're also highly impulsive. So they're not thinking, they're in their feelings. And so we want to limit whatever those accesses are. If that's medication, if that's access to weapons, we want to make sure that we limited those accesses. Kiddos that have future perspectives, have values, are value-centered living, meaning and goals are considered protective factors. Again, these are resources that promote resiliency and reduce potential want for suicide or high-risk behaviors. So the meat of the talk. So what do we do now that we learned kind of the data, the definition, the warning signs? Now, how can we support our kiddo? Ask and be direct. I can't say this over and over again. If it works, there's a video that really speaks to this. But kids want to be asked. It is hard for kids to share with you all that they are struggling. But if you ask, they will tell, most likely. So ask, be direct. Are you thinking about killing yourself or hurting yourself? If this is a friend and you hear and your kiddos are, going around the bushes and talking about Susie, but not really talking about Susie, say, has Susie talked about hurting herself? Has Susie talked about ending her life? Be direct about it. Don't leave them alone. If your child or the adolescent that you're with, don't leave them alone. Do not promise to keep their secrets and their thoughts as secrets. We'll talk about that a little bit later, why that's so important to not promise that. If they're in immediate danger, being so impulsive, getting into a car, talking about wanting to end their life, go to the nearest emergency room or call 911. Most police departments now have mental health providers that do ride-alongs and could do assessments. There are police officers that now have mental health training, so they know how to handle adolescents and families going through these situations. Call their therapist and psychiatrist. I will tell you, I don't know how many times parents will wait a week for their next appointment, their child's next appointment, and said, yeah, I think my kid is struggling. They said that they were feeling, had some suicidal ideations, and it blows my mind. I want them to call me right away. I want you to reach out. If it's during the day, most private practitioners, therapists in the outpatient setting have hours, Monday through Friday, a 9 to 5. If they know your child is struggling, they will be a resource to say, they've been talking about it. They're, heightening the acuity. Let's get them into the hospital, or let them come in and see me. Let me evaluate them so that they can be a resource to help you. That could be your child's psychiatrist or their mental health provider. And then call the suicide crisis hotline. I always tell parents, take this text message number down, as well as share it with your teams. If you don't know what to do, you can call them and they can be a resource, especially in the evenings, especially on the weekends. There's a way. Sometimes it's also really cool for parents to do that with their kiddo. If they're saying, my friend is struggling, I don't know what to do. Okay, I don't either. But I know you love your friend. I know I care about the both of you. Let's see what we can learn. And it feels a little bit like they have a little bit more control. It is not mom and dad telling me what to do. We're getting some professional advice.
Kate, I think it was maybe at the event we met each other at, but some students stood up and talked, some high school students, and they said it was like anonymous answers to the question, like, what do you wish your parents knew? And I remember one of the things they said was that, that I wish they had gotten involved sooner. Like, if you just sort of never hear someone say, oh, I really involved myself too soon on these kinds of topics.
Right.
But it was even the kids saying that, that even if I seemingly pushed them away or didn't invite it, I really did want them to be involved. So,
And I think they did a great job that day. And I think Angela addresses this later in the presentation. Those students did a great job of firsthand telling the parents, talking about it doesn't put the idea in my head. It is on the news. It is in our communities. We're talking about it. So let's talk about information that's, let's talk about it so that we can all help each other in that time of need.
Well, and they have access to so much information. I mean, when different people on this call are of different ages, I know, but probably we are all old enough that we didn't grow up online, or where we could find answers to things as readily. You had to go to the library or, so even the ways in which people can carry out suicide, I think they have so much more access to information in a split second that we didn't have. So,
yeah.
Absolutely.
And again, like we said, we could be sleeping and they have access to reading those things, right? They're on TikTok or Instagram, right? And they can type in anything and it's on their feeds. And if you put up one word, it just, calculates those things. So I think, again, for parents, how do we arm ourselves? A lot of the parents do have barriers. They might have, bark or something on their child's phone that will alert them, right? I also think as kiddos are getting older, we still need to be in their space and we think they don't listen, but they do. So I will tell parents a lot of times, take your kid on a walk, right? Say, come with me on a walk to walk the dog, and just say, I heard this thing, I heard about, this kid at Clements that took their life. Have you ever thought about that? Have you, has your friends talked about that? And it's easier to say, have you heard of your friends talking? And then say, has that happened to you? I have teenage boys. They don't want a lot to do with their mother, who's a therapist, but their mother that's a therapist worries a lot. So I'll just go sit on the edge of their bed while they're playing video games. And they are like, Mom, what are you doing here? Nothing. Right. And again, I will ask them, curious questions, or in a car with them. Right. I think, again, how do we plant these seeds that we can share some information? And I said, look, I don't know. I don't know if you're in high school. I don't know if you're drinking. I don't know if you'll be exposed to it, but let's just suppose you get exposed to this, right? Let's suppose your best friend calls you and say they're struggling, or their boyfriend, left them, or girlfriend, or their parents are mad at them and they just want to kill themselves. How might you be able to handle that? What would you say? I always love to hear what the kids would say.
That's such a good idea. Like sort of role playing, almost like, if you're in this situation, what would you do?
Right.
Taking advantage of that opportunity to actually think about it when the iron's not as hot. I wanted to piggyback on not just, Angela, what you said, but how you said it. Angela was very curious. You said, what do you think about this? And what have you heard? And being very curious. And I swear I'm going to have curiosity, be curious tattooed on my forehead. I love that, because I often hear parents saying, well, my kids won't talk to me, so I can't have that conversation. But often it's because we're not leading with curiosity. We're leading with, well, you're not thinking about that, are you?
Fear.
You're thinking
Fear,
about that.
anxiety.
Right. We're leading with anxiety. We're leading with advice. And we're not leading with curiosity. And so again, it's not just having the conversation. It was the way Angela had the conversation. It's truly being open to what they have to say versus leading the answer we want to hear. And that can be scary. But we can't address what we don't know. We can't talk about what we don't know. We have to ask.
Well,
And
and
a
if
lot-
we're afraid to ask it, then, and we're whatever age we are, then it's hard to expect our kids to be comfortable bringing them
And
to us.
that's a clue.
Yeah, absolutely. I will tell you again, it was so interesting. I did a presentation at another school, and like an hour after I did the presentation, the parent was at our front window saying, I want to schedule an appointment. The mom's like, I just have to tell you this. I was scared. There's so much stigma, but my child has been asking me to go see a provider because they're struggling. And I just keep saying, don't think about it. You're fine. You're wonderful. You're okay. And trying to, I want to say coddle, but really not being able to address, but sharing that the way that I can help my child is really in these formative years is giving them the tools that they need. And so how do we do that? We have them 18, maybe 22, depending on the kiddo that we have, that they will listen to us, and their brains are plastic right now, I want to say. So how can we help that flexible mind be flexible in healthy thinking, healthy coping, healthy strategies, and we be along the road for them. So again, these are some informations about what to do when you're in an absolute crisis, which we've talked about.
Angela, I just want to make sure, know this is built in, but some time for questions, and we have plenty of time, but does it make sense to pause and see if anyone,
Sure.
I know we don't have like a ton of people on the call, but does anyone have a question about the stuff that's been shared thus far? And no pressure if we can keep trucking, but okay, we'll keep going.
So how can we help if someone is suicidal? It helps to listen in a way that shows care and empathy. This does not mean entering into like the person's despair, or it's an attitude of careful optimism is very appropriate in this situation. Avoid minimizing a person's pain, making comments like everything's fine or your life is so good, you have no reason to feel suicidal, or Susie doesn't. Try saying things like, I can see how hopeless you feel, and I can understand that you feel like things can't get better. And I believe they might be able to. I use the word and, I do not use the word but. I hear you. I hear that this is hard, a hard time. And I want you to know and hear me say, I want to help. I want to be a part of the journey to help you, help yourself. Advice should be simple and practical. For example, let's go for a walk and talk. My kids know all the time when I say, let's do a walk and talk. Oh God, mom's got something up her sleeve. But it's interesting. It is now something that is pronounced, and they will say, Mom, you want to go for a walk or a talk as they're aging. You know, reminding them, I'm here for you. What you're talking about are stuff that, you know, makes my head spin. I can't imagine what's going through your mind. But let's maybe get some professional advice. Let's, you know, talk to a school counselor. Let's talk to your therapist this week and see how we can see to the other side, or if there is another side to this. Change can be slow. Trying to help someone who is depressed or struggling with suicidal ideations might respond very slow. It is a very frustrating and anxiety-provoking time for parents a lot of the times. They're the ones that are sleeping outside the bedrooms. They're the ones that are worried when their kid gets in the car, that have been struggling. So it's really important, I tell parents, and At this stage in my career, I work with a lot of the moms or the parents that are struggling. I work on coaching them to not live and parent from fear, but from love. And that starts by them being healthy. You got to take care of yourself so that you know how to respond, as Kate was mentioning, versus react. How can I respond in these situations?
And they're not logical. I think, as parents, one of the parents of the PTO said, intense Carnegie children probably have intense parents, a lot of them. We're all, so just realizing that it's not logical, that, you can't just explain it away to yourself or your child probably, so.
Yeah, it's a part of our brain, right? And so I think it's hard to just put practicalities on it. And I think sometimes that's hard to wrap our brain around for all ages. Take it seriously. Sometimes a suicidal person may ask you to keep the situation a secret. It can be very tempting, especially if this is your kiddo's friend. But again, your kiddos are carrying a lot of burden that they shouldn't. At this stage in their life, that is not for them. And as parents, we need to take that ownership. And they might be mad at us, or friends might be mad at us, but we also know that the child will be alive. And so that's really important to take away. And they could be mad at us, and we're also helping that child and our child get help and be children.
I have a question about interrogating sounds pejorative perhaps, but my kids are experts at evasion. And sometimes I debate, do I ask a binary yes, no, or do I ask something open-ended? And I it's kind of like when you're switching lanes in traffic to get ahead. I'm like, whatever I do doesn't seem to work. But I guess my question is, does science or do you have any recommendations about how do you keep it straightforward? Our kids often sense that we're trying, like, I know what you're doing, Dad. You're trying to ask need questions in a way to get me to give something up. They're smart.
Sure.
How do you deal with that sort of, how do you deal with that? What's the most effective way?
So I'll tell you, they're smarter than us. And they do not want to hear from us, but they need to, right? So I always tell parents, find a curious, open-ended way to have those conversations. Look, I'm a therapist. I work with a lot of adolescents, and I get a lot of I don't knows. And one of the things they teach you as a therapist is to sit in that silence, or to say, you don't know. I'm curious if we can think about it for a second. What would you know, right? And then my kids will say, you're being a smart aleck, right? Like they'll say that to me, and I said, I might be, but I also care and love you, and my job is to prepare you for the world, right? This might not even be something of your concern now, and I hope never, right? But as your parents, I know that this is happening in the world, and I just want to have a conversation about what you think. So tell me what you don't know. A lot of times with younger kids and maybe even older, we have a lot of opportunities that we might miss, right? We might have opportunities at the dinner table of telling me, hey, what's happening in your friends' lives? What's happening in your lives? Nothing. I get that always after school. How was school? Fine. What was so fine about that? And they look at me because they know they can't just say it was fine and fine, right? They have to say, well, I made an A on a test, or, I did really well on that, speaking engagement. They give you little bits. It might be crumbs, but it's a little bit more. I always say there's also opportunities if we're watching movies together, or if we run across something that was on the news, to be able to say, hey, what are your thoughts about that? Right?
Are there,
Go ahead.
so a corollary to that, you mentioned the virtues of being direct. Are there questions that are too direct? And what might those be? Are you sad? Are you bad? Do you feel that you're not worthy? Are you ugly? Like the things that all of us as humans struggle with, are there things that are sort of in the lower left quadrant that we should avoid?
I think it depends on your kiddo. I always call parenting a dance, right? And we might make a mistake. We might not know what to say, but I
Mike
think
is being diplomatic.
but if we will sense if we're looking at our kids with their eye rolling or their nonverbals. I think all we can do is ask and say, I always tell parents, do a soft startup, right? How do you say, look, I don't know how it is for you to be in high school because it looks so different than when I went to high school. I know back then it was tough for me. I can't even imagine how tough it is for you. Right? How can we engage? I also know high school can be lots and loads of fun, right? And so what's happening, and I would just play out scenarios with them. I would say, I don't have the words. I feel I'm going to stumble. I might piss you off, but I'm still going to ask because I love you.
I think that vulnerability is really can help create a safe place for them to talk and share. That they, great example is I remember when my oldest daughter said, I've never been 14 years old before. And I said, and I've never been the mother of a 14-year-old you before. Recognizing that there is an aspect of this parenting dance that's new for us. And we don't have all the answers either. I think that can really help foster a safe conversation, an open conversation.
And they just need to hear that over and over again. We love you. We're not perfect. They also need to hear us role model that environment of creating feelings, emotions, vulnerability, because that's what we want. We want them to know that we are a safe place. It is very interesting. My 10-year-old, all her friends know I'm a therapist. And she'll say, Mommy, like, Georgia's coming over. Can you help her? And I said, what do you mean help her? She's like, she's so sad. Okay, so how could you help her? Right? And then I said, thank you for sharing that Georgia said. Maybe we could all talk together so that she can feel like that is something that she can approach. But I reward or recognize or reinforce, thanks for sharing with me. And how can we not violate your friend's trust that we can all talk together? Right? I think, Daniela, you said, what do we do when our children's friends are struggling or they're coming home? Maybe we don't even know, right? But I think if we do know that our children's friends are struggling, how do we open up that dialogue to say, I love you and I want to check on you. How are you doing with that? It's really important. They've been the holder of that information for a day, maybe a week, right? So it's really important to see what their temperature is and say, okay, how do we create a space that Julie can come over here, that we can talk, and how do we be the adults in the room? And I'm hoping we are creating environments in our home or taking our children's friends to dinners or sporting events that they're in the car, that they can sense that we are a healthy, reliable, safe person that they can reach out to.
I think also in terms of the direct, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just think it's important for this video recording that so many people are going to watch, that the direct questions are really important when it comes to the suicide topic. And the more, sharing vulnerability, getting curious, and being a little more amorphous about how you find a channel of communication with that specific child is maybe for topics that are not as acute as, is that fair to say?
I think it could be, again, it really depends on your child. And I think one of the things that I want to say to parents is your gut knows your kid, right?
Good.
If your kid is more aloof than normal, right? And I'll tell you, when your kids are teenagers, they will be a little bit more aloof, but we still have instincts. I tell my clients this, your gut will tell you if this is right or wrong, right? As parents, we will know. And I think a lot of times parents will tell me after the fact, I knew my kid was struggling. I didn't want to see it. My gut was telling me something was wrong. I just didn't listen to it. So I will tell you as parents, you will, and again, we might be wrong. I'd rather be wrong and go overboard than underestimate and not do anything. And I think it's in that dance that we call, how do I just respond? How do I just say, I just noticed something seems to be a little off with you lately. Is there something going on? Or how have you been doing?
And I'll add that I think both can be true at the same time. I think we can be curious and direct at the same time. And just as Angela, you modeled for us, that we can say, have you ever thought about this? So we're open-minded to what the answer might be while being very curious at the same time.
If you're unsure, again, the suicide hotline is something that we could reach out to as parents, ask them questions. It is free, it is open to all sorts of people, but also find a therapist, find a friend, find people as a community that you can reach out to that can help you. Research again indicates that kids are talking to kids. And what is really also interesting is those kids that they're talking to aren't telling us. And so it's really important to break up that barrier and be a resource. Know who our kids are surrounding themselves with. Make sure that they have approachable coaches, teachers, counselors. And if you don't know that, ask them, hey, if you were struggling with schoolwork in your life or with a friend, who would you go to? And it could be people in their community. It could be our extended family. It could be grandma. It could be an uncle or an aunt. It could be a friend, an adult friend. How do we make sure our kid has resources? It could be an older cousin.
What's the best way to ask for a source for a therapist? It's amazing. I always am amazed at, it's like, on the one hand, how many people agree that this is a profoundly impactful and, important resource for all of us, but a lot of folks don't know where to start. So what do you do?
Great question. I think a lot of times people will reach out and said, I don't even know where to start. It's so overwhelming, right? A lot of times I say, reach out to the communities that you are already embedded in. If you have dad's groups or mom's groups, how can you ask? A lot of times I get referrals because my friend of a friend told me about you. So people are and have connections. If you belong to a church community, ministers have lists that, again, they know you, they will be able to better match you. A lot of times you can go on, there's a website called Psychology Today that has filters. If you want to use insurance, if we're looking for somebody who works specifically with adolescents, they share, my kiddo might have anxiety. And you can look at filters and start there. Again, I think me and Kate are one of the things that we really want to do is empower our community to be healthy and armed with resources. So even calling a therapist and vetting them for 15 minutes, I will say is really, really important because it's a relationship. You want to know that you found the right relationship. There's a lot of ways to do that, but I would start with your pediatrician who's probably followed your kid. School counselors are great resources. Youth ministers or coaches that, again, that know your kiddo could be great resources. A lot of those folks already have relationships with providers. But
Thanks so much. That's super helpful.
Yeah, I'll also let Danielle, she'll have resources of both me and Kate. We're always happy to provide resources or try there. The last thing is listen with empathy and provide support. A breakup or a fight with their peer groups might not seem like a big deal. Our brains, adult brains, can think, oh yeah, in a day or two, it'll be fine. Your friends are going to pick on someone else, right? You're going to find another boyfriend. But for them, this feels immensely hard and difficult. Not getting into the college that they want to, not passing or getting the grade that they may want. Will be very, very hard for them. So minimizing what your child feels or what their friends might be going through. Oh, Susie, who, not a big deal. That doesn't help them. Them hearing you say, I get it. I hear you. That must be hard. Sympathizing, validating what they're feeling, and really listening is what they need. Not advice giving, not anything else, but just parrot what they're saying.
Because the lens through which they see the world may be very different from ours. So just because we would see something a certain way, interpret it a certain way, respond to it a certain way, doesn't mean that they process the world around them the same way. And so being open-minded to how they see it and how they're processing it, so you can be with them in that process.
So I think that's the end of the presentation. I know we have a few minutes for questions. If anybody else has any more questions, I'm going to try to load this video, which I think is very powerful.
Angela, while you're doing that, I had a little one for you. You mentioned the power of saying and versus but. Will you elaborate? I think that is highly related to several conversation topics that came up tonight. Will you elaborate to the group on that one?
Sure. I think there's a lot of research, and our go-to, our automatic inclination is to say but. And when I say, you know, I know that you're having a hard semester, or that test was really hard, but it's not the end of the world, right? What we do is negate everything at the beginning. We negate what they're feeling, that this is hard, this is difficult. And if they hear that but, what happens to us is typically that we shut down. So we want to empower and enrich and validate what they're feeling. There is something in the power of just validating their feelings, that they feel heard and seen, and we're not dismissing. And what Kate had implied earlier is we can be feeling miserable and anxious about something. We can be happy and anxious about something. So the and is really to be able to hold both in mind.
In the chat, I'm just going to put the two people, Kyla Griffin and Tiffany Williams, who are, Kyla is the 504 coordinator and social emotional.
As the founder of our family of brands, I'm excited to
We have someone.
Sorry, that was me.
Oh, thank you. So, anyway, she's the go-to on campus for social emotional well-being and needs. And then Ms. Williams is the wraparound specialist. So really both of them, or either of them, are great. But what I had said in here is that if you want to reach out to connect about your own child's well-being, or also if you have a concern about another Cvhs student and you don't know the parents or know the child, but you have, maybe you've heard that they express suicidal ideation and you don't know what to do with that, then that would be a good resource for you as well, is to call up one of these two folks at Carnegie and say, I don't know what to do, and maybe an adult needs to check in on this student. So that will be in the chat.
Do I have enough time to share this?
Sure. Go. How long is the video?
It's like 2-3 minutes.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have my ups and downs, just like anybody
Okay,
else.
we can't see the
Maybe
video
more
though,
than
so
anybody
we need to
else.
make sure you're
can be hard to
sharing
figure out.
screen.
I like my privacy. I don't want you looking over my shoulder all the time.
But you know your kid better than anybody else.
Got it.
You think he's acting different than usual?
Acting really down, crying all the time for no good reason,
Or getting really mad? Not able to sleep? Or sleeping too much?
Shutting her friends out or giving her stuff away.
Acting reckless? Drinking, using drugs? Staying out late?
Suddenly not doing stuff he used to love.
Or doing stuff that's just not like him?
it might be nothing to worry about. It might just be high school.
Or it might be something more. He might be depressed. Not just feeling down, really depressed.
It might be that your kid is thinking about killing himself. It happens more than you think, more than it should.
And people say, I had no idea.
I thought it was just a phase he was going through.
I never thought she'd do it.
I wish he'd come to me.
I wish he'd said something.
I wish I'd said something.
When it's too late. So if you think your kid's acting different, if she seems like a different person, say something.
Say, what's wrong? How can I help?
And ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself? It doesn't hurt to ask. In fact, it helps.
When people are thinking about killing themselves, they want somebody to ask. They want somebody to care.
maybe you're afraid you'll make it worse if you ask. Like, you'll put the idea in their head.
Believe me, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't hurt to ask. In fact, the best way to keep a teenager from killing herself is to ask, are you thinking about killing yourself?
And what if they say yes?
Or maybe.
Or sometimes,
Well, here's what you don't say.
that's crazy.
Don't be such a drama
You're
queen.
making too much of this.
That boy's not worth killing herself over. That's not going to solve anything.
You're just trying to get attention.
You're not going to kill yourself. What you do say is,
I'm sorry you're feeling so bad. How can I help? We'll get through this together.
Let's keep you safe.
a lot of people think about killing themselves, adults and kids. Most of them never try it, but some of them do. So if your kid says,
I'd be better off dead. I can't live with this.
I'm gonna kill myself, take her seriously. Find someone she can talk to about it. Someone who knows how to help.
Sometimes kids want to kill themselves because something happened. A breakup, a failure. But sometimes it goes deeper, and it's not going to go away by itself. Get some help. Talk to your doctor.
Or a counselor at school.
Or your minister.
But don't just let it drop.
And make sure that your kid always has someone to turn to. Someone he trusts. Make a list together, right then. 3, 4, 5 names.
Put a suicide hotline number on there too.
Have him keep that list in his wallet, so he always knows where to turn.
Be sure your home is safe. If you have pills she could use to hurt herself, lock them up.
If you have a gun, don't just lock it up. Get it out of the house. Bullets, too.
And one more thing. If you think your kid might be about to hurt himself, don't leave him alone.
Take him to the emergency room.
Call 911 if you have to.
We all have our ups and downs, but sometimes it's more than that.
If you think something's wrong, the only way to find out is to ask. Ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself?
Don't wait until you're sure. Trust your gut, because it never hurts to ask.
And it can make a big difference. All the difference. In your kid's life.
I think we'd like to have the link to the video.
I will send that to you. I think it really summarizes a lot of things, and there's a lot of good kind of verbiage to share.
Yeah, it's super powerful in the part where they say, don't say these things. And they're all things that we probably all said to our kid at some time, you know?
Right.
So, well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And do you have any questions for us or any parting words?
No. Thank you, and for making the space and time, especially during the holidays. Parenting is not an easy job. It is one of the hardest jobs I would say anybody has to do. So I applaud you all for showing up. I applaud the school and the PTO for, being able to have this as a resource even for later. So I think you guys are doing an amazing job. And as a community, we're here to help our children and help our parents.
Thank you so much. And I know Kate and I have talked about, hopefully you all or some group of you will be able to come back in the early part of next year and talk about some of the actual skills that are that help support the social emotional well-being and support these kids as they transition into college and are out on their own, and so they can flourish and not sort of languish and
Right.
end up coming home, when you think
One of
you've
the-
gotten them out in the world.
One of the questions we get most often is, are the kids hearing the same message we are? And that's the conversation we're having with Tiffany as well, is helping facilitate getting this information in the hands of your students as well.
Oh, yes. Okay. So yeah, that's a good thing. I'm glad you brought that up, that there's a parallel path happening internally at school with Menninger and Tiffany and Kyla. So that'll be delivered in whatever form you all are, I guess, envisioning, and age appropriate and developmentally appropriate ways. So
Yeah. And I think it would be great when that gets arranged for parents to say, hey, I heard that there was this speaking engagement at school, or these people came and talked. What was it about? Can you share with me? And again, see what comes about in those conversations.
that's a great idea.
Conversation starter.
Yeah, we can, when you all sort of have gone through that process, then we can also include it in our PTO newsletter, even that's just like, this a quick blurb, this thing happened, and you might want to ask
Yeah.
your
Check in with your kiddo.
children about it. And here's a link to the other part, the parent part. So thank you.
Thank you
Have a
all.
wonderful holiday. I know it's
You too.
a busy time for everyone, and be well.
Bye.
Happy holidays. Thank you again, Danielle.
Bye. Thank you.
Everyone.